All right. Hey, everyone. This is the sig-auth meeting for March 3rd, 2021. We have a pretty full agenda, so we're going to get started real quick. And let's see, I think, Martin, you wanted to show us a demo. And the only way I know to make you be able to share your screen is to make you a co-host. So,
Yeah.
so have at it.
Okay. Just tell me when you actually see my screen.
I can see it now.
Yeah, just. All right then. Okay, so I'll be quick. Hopefully, there won't be a lot of questions. So last year, Mo actually made a dynamic authentication cap for allowing end users or allowing cluster admins to dynamically add new ways in which end users are able to authenticate to the API server. So pretty much in the CAP, you are allowed to dynamically add new open ID connect providers, add new certificates for client-based authentication, and there was another use case. However, the CAP was not accepted, and in the meantime, I found that this functionality could be quite useful for several use cases that we want to have. And so we actually went and implemented a webhook authenticator, in which you are allowed to add multiple OpenID Connect providers. So just disclaimer, everything here is alpha. I've been working on this like for after work for like at tops like 20 hours tops. So yeah, it's pretty much very much alpha. So our main use case is that we have a lot of Kubernetes clusters, and workloads in those Kubernetes clusters often talk to the API server, to API servers of different clusters. And currently what we do is we create a service account tokens, and then we store them in each one of those clusters. And this is really bad because those tokens have to be rotated. Also, it makes the entire experience quite worse. So what we want to achieve in our use case is to establish a trust between those Kubernetes clusters using service account token volume projection and service account issue discovery. So basically, in one cluster, we should be able to register all the the OpenID Connect endpoints of the other Kubernetes clusters. So how this entire thing works? So it's a simple webhook with a controller inside of it that acts on this OpenID Connect resource, and inside of it you specify the standard settings that you have in the Kube API server flags, issuer, client ID, username claims, and etc. So pretty much, yeah, you have some nice pictures on the flow, but at the end, yeah, an admin creates this resource. The controller or the webhook watches for such requests. It talks to the discovery endpoint. It gets the keys, and then it adds this new this new OpenID Connect provider to the list of OpenID Connect authenticators that is stored in memory. And when the end user authenticates, so yeah, I'll just skip to the picture. The user authenticates at their OpenID Connect provider. They get a token, and then they send this token to the API server, and because this webhook authenticator currently also supports API server delegation of authentication and authorization. It also checks, let's say, the identity of the callee, But at the end, it matches, possibly matches the token which the end user presents with one of the already registered identity providers, and then it, the flow pretty much goes back to the API server with the token review. So this is the high-level overview for the end user. So let's jump straight to the demo then. So, okay, so I have started in advanced Minikube, and I've also enabled the webhook authenticator with the standard flag. For the demo purposes, I've also lowered the cache to 10 seconds, just to make things more easy. Okay, and now the API server is up and running. As you can see, we have just a standard Kubernetes cluster with almost nothing inside of it. So the next thing that I'll do is I'll go and then I'll simply go and create the custom resource for this OpenID Connect resource, and then I'm going to deploy. I'm going to go and deploy DEX and the authenticator itself. So I'll go here and I have here a small sample. And in this case, we create the service for the authenticator. The authenticator currently in this simple deployment on Minikube listens is running as a node part because we also want to access it and DEX, and this makes communications, at least in this demo scenario, quite easy. And then we deploy the authenticator, and here, if in this namespace, we have the authenticator up and running. So the next thing that I'll do is I'll actually go and I have prepared in advanced. I have prepared in advanced a kubeconfig context, which allows me to authenticate with DEX. So here, even if we see the config, we actually use the the OIDC login plugin to quickly get the token. But in this case, we have provided some simple DEX secret and then client, and as you can see, the plugin is already automatically authenticating me. So let me just get my credentials, which is password, just for this demo. Okay, we don't want this one. And now, when I try, for example, to use this context here, we see that the API server does not recognize the token which I have already received. And now the next thing as an admin is I'll go here and then I'll simply apply the configuration, the OpenID Connect configuration for DEX. So it's this one. And I have created this, and if I see it, we see that it's for DEX. It also it uses like this host which is running there. This is the port of the Minikube, and the DEX is exported on this port. And now, if I do kubectl get pods, you see that I'm now authenticated, and the authenticator has done its job, and now the Kube API server recognizes me that I'm admin at example.com, and this is the issuer. So as an example, I'll also add another OpenID Connect issuer, which I have prepared also in advance. So just to show you that I'm not cheating. So I have prepared like an Auth0 OpenID Connect provider. And if I add it, auth 0. And if I switch the context to auth 0, now I should be able, after login and etc. Come on. Yep. Okay. I have authenticated, and as you can see right now, my user is also able to be is recognized by the cluster. And if I, for example, now decided that I don't want this identity provider, I'll simply delete it. Right now, the kube IPS server will cache this response for 10 seconds, and if I execute the command again, I'll be unauthorized. So, so this is so far the demo. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, anybody? Before we go on. Cool.
Yeah. So something for me, in order to make this entire scenario working, we had to make some, or me, I had to make some small changes, let's say, to the way the OpenID Connect issuer today works. One problem that we discover that I discovered is that currently the way you register, for example, a new OpenID Connect provider is that you also you always provide, for example, the CA file. And in the context of a Kubernetes controller, this doesn't work quite well. My initial hack was to create like a temporary file in the file system and then just use it. However, in the end, I chose to more or less copy the entire OpenID Connect file and then simply wrap it inside an additional, let's say, options that allows me to, let's say, have the CA bundle as let's say a byte array. So yeah, this is one of the problems that which I had trouble with. The other issue, the other issue that I had when I was implementing this entire thing was that currently the way the verifier works, so the OpenID Connect provider, so the OpenID Connect waits for and posts the OpenID Connect discovery endpoint, and this doesn't make a quite nice experience, at least for like the controllers. So my question is, do you want to contribute like some of those changes that I, for example, made, or how open are you for like accepting such changes, just for this use case, or we should keep our fork here?
So I think we're a little bit out of time on this one.
Yeah.
Martin, I would be open to, like, if you just made either one or many issues on KK, and we could
Okay.
discuss there. So I fully understand exactly where you had to make the changes, and then if we want to follow up next time, we can too.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you for the demo. All right. Let me go back to sharing my screen. All right. So I'm going to skip down to Micah first, and then we'll come back to some other stuff. That way we can continue the discussion from last time? I think it was last time. Let's see. All right. I have it open. Let me use it. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Mike, are you on the call? I know you and Micah discussed this some too. Where were you at on this? What did we have left?
Is Mike here? I don't see Mike on the call.
Is he not on? I thought I saw him earlier. Maybe he dropped. Yeah,
I don't think he's here.
Yeah. Well, no, he's a co-host. I just don't see him talking.
Oh, he's here. I just missed him.
I guess I had one question I had sort of come up on this since the last time we talked about it. So, token request is a built-in API to the Cube API server, and currently is sort of guaranteed to return you a service account token that looks in a certain shape. How do we feel about the fact that if we had sort of arbitrary mutation capability at some low level in the API server hooks that basically made those tokens look different and thus not consistent across different providers of Kubernetes distributions? I don't know if that's necessarily a problem, but it does feel kind of weird. Certainly in the respect of one of the benefits of having the service account OIDC discovery stuff that we added is that you can then authenticate those tokens in a particular way, but it does require that they have a particular structure that sort of matches what you expect. I mean, certainly you can authenticate the fact that they originated from the API server based on just the signing information. But if you want to extract any claims, you must then have to make some assumptions about what claims are present. Today, those claims are sort of well structured and known because they're the service account token claims. Jordan, you're muted.
So complicated. I thought what was being proposed was strictly additive, so that the standard claims that are included would still be included, and additional claims or stanzas could be injected. So, I mean, JOTs tolerate additional claims just fine.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, if the contract was to be changed to like, hey, signer, sign this payload, to hey, signer, give me the payload already signed. Now, like, are you saying that we would then enforce in our own validation what it must have in there in some way, like it must have everything?
I mean, we could. If token request is used broadly for authentication, which it is, then like if you took out claims that were expected and required to pass API server authentication, like you wouldn't, I don't see how you would end up with a usable cluster.
Yeah, so that's certainly fair. On the additive bit, do we feel like it's a good idea to basically make it so that there's like opaque blobs of other stuff that you can't rely on in any reasonable manner because it totally depends on the provider under you doing $sign something?
Could we pick like a prefix, like a namespace, and say this is requested claims? Like this is something that the that the party is trying to communicate about themselves that we have no way of verifying, but here you go.
I think Micah's particular use case depended strongly on a specific schema of claims in the job.
In a specific namespace.
Yeah, which really kind of kills it, right? Because then we can't. Basically, Micah's stuff already exists and is widely deployed, and he knows that he wants to not break it.
I mean, like this is sort of the JOT equivalent of a cross-signed certificate. It's here's a blob, and Kubernetes has claims they recognize and want to use, and this other thing has claims they recognize and want to use. And I already have plumbing to get this credential to things, and I already can associate it with workloads, and I already can like bound its lifetime to the workload's lifetime. Like there's all this super convenient stuff around it. It would be like I don't necessarily object to the idea of it. I think what you're bringing up, Mo, is you wouldn't want anyone to depend on it other than the thing that knows about those special claims. Like you wouldn't want workloads introspecting those claims and being like, oh, cool, I must be running in this environment because this claim showed up in my service account token.
Which is exactly what people would do, because that's what people do.
Or even better, workloads accidentally responding to some claims that somebody else put into a service account token for their own reason.
I guess I would ask is, and I don't know if this is actually any easier. Do we? I guess there must probably be a strong use case, at least for, I want to add extra stuff that's not a simple transformation of what's already there. Right? I want to add extra information that I know that Cube does not know, and I want to add that, and maybe take also the stuff that Cube does know and do something with it. Right? So it's you can't just say, give me like a transformer for claims and I will also let you do that. It has to be sort of a free-for-all, like, here's the claims you must have. So those are the Cube ones. Have at it, sir, with your remaining payload.
The other gross like option I talked with Mike about, Mike, tell me if you don't want me to bring this up, is like you could, I'm gonna wave my hand and say Rego or something, but to give Cube API server basically a transformation template to say, here's the claims you know about, inject them in this other namespace. You don't have to make an external call to basically modify the claims. Then you're at this point you're picking like a templating, like I mean, DSL,
like a go template, right? Like here's the go template, and here's the payload that get passed in. Emit the JSON blob that you want also signed along.
Yeah,
that would be really awful. But I am nervous about all of these things that offload what could never fail before into a thing that is effectively over the network and now can fail. I guess that's inherent to all of these external things. Like it's probably not as bad as a webhook because you would probably be doing it over a socket. And it's probably more highly available than $ random webhook.
The other option for us here is to just not do this, right? Like to put some intermediary that the token goes to instead of what we currently have. But that requires us to like basically have every pod, instead of calling the existing AWS service that they do with their token, call some other AWS like EKS hosted service that can do this. Okay, I know which token you are. You don't have the context for say STS, the AWS STS service, but I can add the the session in AWS terms, the session tags that I want from your Kubernetes claims. But yeah, that wouldn't require a Kubernetes change, but that would be like a new service we have to stand up to be an intermediary.
It's not great. It's not the most awful thing because then at least you own the whole stack and you're not dependent on any arbitrary Cube limitations.
Were you envisioning putting these custom claims into all of the service account tokens minted, even the ones intended for use against the Cube API server?
Probably not. Like, I think we it's a good question. Because the subject in the token, or not the subject, the client ID, we basically, EKS has a well-known client ID that we reference, but customers can pick whatever client ID they want in the AWS IAM side. And then they just need to use the same corresponding client ID on their, like in their, when they say, mount this token in my pod. And if they changed one up to the one other than that one that we documented, like like say the subject of the cluster. Say I'm a customer and I don't want to use, you know, the client ID of say sts.amazonaws.com, but I put the cluster like kubernetes.default.service. Then I've made every service account token also like that talks to that's useful against API server, also useful against AWS. Bad, you know, anti-pattern, bad practice. But I guess we just don't exert control over what client ID customers have. We have a documented one, and we could say only this one is supported for session tags, and that might be feasible. I guess to answer your question, I to every token, especially ones against Kube API server, because it's just never going to be used there. Or I guess, that extra claim is never used against Kube API server.
Yeah, adding stuff to lots of tokens that makes it usable to other places is a little unfortunate, and making the path for minting all tokens more complex and more fragile in order to be able to inject claims that are only used in this sort of like secondary case is also kind of unfortunate. I mean, like the token exchange thing, like I get my token and then I talk to a token granting service and say, like, I am this pod and I can prove it. Give me a token for STS or whatever. Like that's probably the like correct if running a service was cheap approach. But I recognize that it makes it more complex for clients and you have to run another service. I don't know. So maybe those two things are kind of the most, like the biggest objections. Like this exposes API service, visible API service to clients, because they can look at their token and say like, yeah, there's stuff in my token. I can make assumptions about it. And then it makes the token granting path more complex for a secondary use case. We should probably time box this. Like I said, I'm sympathetic to parts of the use case, but it would be useful to know, like, are these things that lots of people would just jump on and use? Or are we kind of, like, how bad would it be to run a service that exchanges tokens? And how bad would it be to add this in? And would more people than just you use it?
Could probably have a better answer for that question in like 2 weeks.
Okay.
We're kind of in our planning cycle, and I'm pushing hard to maybe have something like that. There's lots of other problems that I'd like to solve, and that could help solve those. But
okay.
Yeah.
A related question, Jordan, you might remember this. Can you have an aggregated API that does not have a matching service on the cluster? Like, can you just point it to some random like address?
Not yet. That is a feature that would be nice to add now that the rest of our webhooks have that capability.
Okay, cool. So if we had that, Micah, and you could reasonably just have an API service that is on your cluster, and thus the whole like, what Kube API do I call to do this STS exchange is super easy and well defined because it's the same on every cluster. It's just talk to the API server at a well-known Kube API. Would that make anything better for you and more standardized? Like everything sort of flows through a more common flow. Like it is like I'm assuming these workloads are running on Kube, and thus having more Kube native things might make people happier, right? Like you can use client Go, you can have generated clients or whatever, you know, all the things.
Yeah, that could work. The other option is like a CSI based solution.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Like in 120 now that CSI can get the JOT like from kubelet without ever even mousing it into the pod. That could then be exchanged for either another token or the credentials themselves. Okay. So that might be the other route to investigate. So I think I'm fine to time boxes here and say like do more investigation in those routes.
Okay.
It's not ideal because there's more, more exchanges, but that might be sufficient. So yeah, I'll take that as like homework, and in 2 weeks can follow up and say, here's what I found.
Cool, thank you. Okay, I put this issue on the agenda because I saw it. Someone had made an issue saying, hey, when you do port forward, auditing does not record the port that was forwarded. And this is a bug. I responded with, we don't track headers or request parameters today, as far as I know, in auditing at all. The reason I put this on here is I consider this a feature request and not a bug. Because to me, it looks like a feature request. I want to get folks' opinion. Because we actually got it.
This looks reasonable to me, but yeah, I agree. It's a feature request.
Like I have no problem with like if we log more headers with I don't know some config or something, and we just we just flat out ignore the parameters that are passed in today. I think we only look at like the audit ID header, which I've always found questionable because I don't think we validate that in any way. So, but that aside, yeah, like yes, we should audit all the things if possible, but we're just not there yet.
Yeah, so query, I thought the query string, and if the request uses like options that get decoded before it gets handed off to the handler, those I thought got audited. Maybe I'm mixing that up with admission.
I mean, I guess you might be right. I guess I forget what request URI includes in it.
Yeah, that includes the query string.
Okay, so I missed that. So it could be in there, right? Like, well, okay. So I think in this person's case, it was done via cheap which used the header. So I'm just wrong here. So I can go fix my comment and say that no, it's not parameters. It's everything. So parameters are logged. It's just not headers are logged. And that's unfortunate because we optionally allow you to use the port header.
We may have solved this for admission and not for audit. I remember options for like connect options for exec and attach and port forward getting treated specially for admission. So we may need to do something similar for audit. I would be in favor of doing that. That seems useful to audit. If you probably at the same verbosity level as like if you see the incoming objects, like that's the right level of verbosity to include details about the audit. So I think we have the information we need. It might just not be wired up for audit because it had to be done specially.
Okay. Could you link the work maybe in here, and then we can follow up offline?
Yeah, I'll add a comment and link to what we did for admission.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is this is actually a bug. Effectively, it's an oversight, not a feature request. Okay. Cool. Okay. All right. Jordan, you had added this to the agenda.
Yeah, there was a request that a couple of us weighed in on, but I wanted to bring it up here for just to see if there were other perspectives before I answered this. So someone had requested that the new projected service account tokens be able to be used as an environment variable source. Currently, you can do that with secrets or config maps or downward API values. And I replied that I don't think that's a great idea in general. Using, like, exposing secret values and environment variables plumbs them into places that aren't really expecting to deal with confidential information, like the container runtime specs. Like if you say cry control info, you can actually see all the environment variables configured for a pod. And so if secret values were plumbed into environment variables, they show up there, which isn't great. And then in particular, environment variables are only set at container start. And for values that came out of a secret object, maybe that's okay. Maybe you're not going to update those. But for these, the projected service account tokens, the point of them, one of the points of them is that they expire and they're time limited. And so mapping those to a environment variable that can only be set at startup didn't make sense to me. The person requesting this said, like, what if it's a short-lived, it's just going to run, use it once, and then exit? Like, it doesn't care if it doesn't get refreshed. My feeling is, if you want to use environment variables for that, like, write a wrapper and, like, take the value from the file, put it in an environment variable, and then call the thing you're going to call that expects an environment variable. But I wanted to just bring it up here and see if I was missing, like, clear reasons that this would be good to do before I close this out.
I can't find it, but I feel like this was one of the original security improvements that we listed when we created bound service account tokens, or the token volume. But I don't see it in the KEP. I agree with your sentiment, though.
Key security reason that you can't do this.
Right. We are introducing this new API. We are dropping support for this.
Yeah, that's what I remember as well.
Rita, what have you I know everyone wants it. Do you suggest, like, write a wrapper if you have a thing that needs to consume an MVAR? Like, have you seen good objections to doing it that way, or
when you say custom wrapper, is it like a script that runs before the, like, on container?
Yeah, a script or an invoker, or
yeah. I mean, I can send you the issues where we recommended that, and then people gave thumbs down. I mean, it works, but people don't like it, right? People just want it in an environment variable. And I think we can probably blame 12-factor apps for all of this. But I think because that feature is available for secrets, then they want this for everything else that looks like secrets. And so we've been fighting against this for a very, very long time, but eventually we kind of gave in because the people really want this.
So
yeah, go ahead.
And specifically the adaption of their NVAR, I suspect a lot of these people are people who've eliminated shells following practices from certain large cloud companies who shall remain nameless on the call, saying get rid of the whole operating system inside the container. Now you have no way to work around this. But I won't, like, I know I've seen that in that context. There's a bunch of other challenges, which is, like, we can't go do secret sources for everything. So, like, we would be able to do it for tokens, but we wouldn't be able to do it for arbitrary CSI volumes. And then we'd have to get into, like, CSI. So, like, I feel like if this is something that's important enough, it kind of feels like it needs to be a new type of design, and, like, exec containers are one way of bypassing this. There's other ways. I mean,
a thin process that So what we did when we were working on the distro list stuff for the control plane images, we ran into like logging redirection issues. So we had a Go runner binary whose only job was to take a command line and then invoke that and redirect output to a place. Like,
there was some well-heeled set of tools that could provide standard behavior in all environments. But yeah, I mean,
it's not Bash. I mean, come on.
Well, I mean, like you could argue, someone could go easily put a shim in all the distro list images that do all the things in Bash, right? Like that's BusyBox. Maybe there should be a cube runner.
Like invoking and being able to do standard in, out, error redirection and environment variable setting. Like,
yeah, I mean,
that seems like a useful toolbox. I'd be happy to see like a documented, you want to do this, here's an image you can use to do it. That seems useful.
Yeah, and effectively the Proud team walked backwards into this, and then they realized why the POSIX spec is insane and complicated, because they tried to be general purpose and couldn't constrain it. So there are some risks there, but I do kind of agree, Jordan, that like if somebody wants to standardize on this, it is perfectly possible to do it today. And it's not Cube's job to handle, because like you could argue like Cube's just going to do a worse job of it than every other solution out there, whereas like the wrapper can do things like detecting other forms of change like CSI drivers.
Yeah. All right. I think I'll summarize this in the issue. Thanks.
Just to pile on though, like most of the reasoning from users is like, I can go change some existing solutions that do expect environment variables. And if you look at all of the existing Helm charts, a lot of them do expect environment variables.
Yeah. So it's something at the cube level. So it's not even like a legacy application that you're building it to an image, but you could put one more layer on that invokes it via something that sets environment variables. It's something that is already cube aware and is expecting environment variables.
That's right.
But to be fair though, Rita, in that context, and this specific thing, that thing's gonna work for an hour, and then its token's gonna be expired.
I mean, that's a feature for some Helm charts. And maybe this is like Mo, that's a good point, but like we would need to provide guidance about what the change is, and we should understand. So like I do think maybe, Rita, like we should get a write-up of what we recommend doing for the set of places that we've heard it. And if we can't come up with a reason, we should crowdsource that with the smart people in the users list and be like, hey, this is deliberately chosen. Here's the reasons. Here's why. We're going to get thumbs downs no matter what, but the alternative is just keep adding more and more things to secret projection or in projection, which we can't even do today, right? Like we couldn't do it for a large class of stuff that's already in containers, not just secrets.
Right, and to your question about what happens if the data is old, this is also why the second most requested feature is auto rotation. And so assuming that's in place, then it's not like people are okay with it. This is how you ensure the data is not old, right?
How do you do auto rotation of an NVAR?
You have to restart the process, which gets into signals, which gets into what signal do you send, which gets into how long do you wait, which gets into overrides on termination for graceful. There's definitely there's a reason why the signal stuff hasn't progressed, and it's because we can't really find a nice clean cut line. I mean, there's an argument here that things like probes should be allowed to check other stuff. And so you could easily have a probe today that checks whether the variables changed. It's just ugly and painful. So. And you can't have multiple probes either, which is also a blocker. I mean, there's probably other solutions to a lot of these. Maybe this isn't the right forum to talk about it because there is a little bit of an overlap with sig-auth, and there's a little bit of overlap with like the runtime environment of the application. So it overlaps a little bit with SigNode. So it could be a SigArch discussion where we say, hey, like there's a lot of people who are trying to do dynamic things. How do we target these? But it might be good to talk to the SIGs directly before we go to SigArch on that.
Okay, we don't have that much time left. I was going to let Ben talk about authentication source for webhooks? Ben, are you on the call?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So this is basically a carry forward work for the old CAP 658, where a proposal was created for hooking up extension API service webhook client more easily with the webhook server. It's such a mouthful. So I just basically did some research on his proposal and tried to break down the work into smaller chunks for easier work and proposal. So this chunk is basically on the client end. So providing an easier setup for webhook client to request for a bearer token. So the current challenge is, even though we have dynamic webhook registration, we still configure the authentication in kubeconfig files and then refer that in the webhook admission configuration. It's like Russian dolls. It's layer of files. So I'm proposing to add an API into the webhook client config so basically having a configuration that specifies that the webhook client should just get a token through a token request from the API server, Kube API server. So any thoughts on the general idea of it? I think the biggest concern in the previous proposal was in the event that there are a lot of webhook requests, the process of requesting a token will slow down or add latency to the webhook request, and in general slow down the whole admission process. So I think we can cache the token in the authentication info resolver. I think from the code reading, I think that's the place that we can augment it and reduce the latency in general.
I think, if I recall correctly, the biggest question around this was, what do you do when the API servers making the calls are not homogeneous? So you can have aggregated API servers. You can put admission on resources that are not served by the Kube API server. Yep. And so those API servers would be making calls to admission plugins. What identity would those API servers use?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I am still in the research phase on that. I think the general direction is probably using a service account of that extension API server. I think that will definitely require more setup. For example, for the auth resolver to have access to the service account token, or yeah, I think that will be a more implementation level research to do on my side.
So I was going to say, as an initial gut thought, the thought of my extension API server sending its credentials out, like the credentials it uses against the normal Kube API server, to a random webhook.
No, it would get an audience scoped one. It would get one scoped to the audience of the service for the admission webhook.
Right. So I guess that's what's unclear to me on this is, so are we saying that we would, so every webhook is going to be attached to effectively a service account, and then somewhere there's going to be an audience configured for the webhook? No, admission webhook identifies a service that backs it. And so the audience would be, I would expect it to be the same service URL that we're requesting. Like I, as an API server, I'm going to make a call to an admission webhook at mywebhook.service.foo. And so the audience I need a token for is my webhook.service.foo.
Yeah, if we scroll down to like the a little bit down to the user facing change, so you'll see that I think is yeah. So here, like in the client config, yeah. So authentication source will be in the client config, and in the client config, we already have the URL or the service in cluster service path to the webhook. So that can be used as the audience of the token. So we're not sending the ID token or service account token itself, but we're requesting another access token through the token request API.
Okay, so the extension API server would gain the ability to ask for token requests for itself or different.
Right.
In any API server you wanted to use tokens to authenticate to webhooks would have to be able to request those tokens.
So currently, I think we're already doing this. We're already adding a token, but that's a static token we define in the kubeconfig file. This is basically removing that setup as an optional. So if this is added, the developer doesn't really need to mint a token, put in a kubeconfig file, mount it, and then create another emission configuration file and then mount it again. So they can just specify it here through the dynamic validating webhook configuration object.
So a related question, would we be happy with, I guess what this would inevitably require is the webhook side would start sort of honoring these tokens. That's the authentication mechanism. And
yes, that will be the next stage. Yeah, I plan to do it in a different proposal.
Right. The question I have there though is those, you basically have to become dependent on this structure, right? What we're saying is we don't want to support a generic mechanism for supply token and you get to decide the backend that honors that token. We're going to say, no, they're going to be cube style tokens that look exactly like this with this particular structure. And there's an OIDC endpoint that you can go get some JOX keys from and have that. That's how you verify this stuff. Is that what we want? The mental thought I have on this is, and I know that it doesn't exactly translate to a Cube API, but on the client side, like with kubectl and stuff, we have the client.exec plugins, right? That are basically like, give me any credential you want, however you want, and I will hand that to whoever I talk to, and they will validate that however they want to. And we have ultimate flexibility, effectively. And this proposal is very much not that, which seems fine. I'm just sort of asking the question of, is that what we want?
Yeah, so this proposal is not proposing to replace the current authentication config. This is an alternative. Yeah, for people who are too lazy to set up the whole OIDC. And I think I kind of read that through the lines, between the lines in the original proposal. It's like they don't really want to go through all the token minting and then file provisioning or mount secrets. Yeah, so this is one way to do it alternatively. So I also tried to like
for the webhook for the admission webhooks, the validating and mutating ones, you can't provide a file to the API server, right? There's no file system access, right?
Excuse me. Sorry, I'm a little bit lost.
I was just asking, like you had mentioned building up the structured like config and stuff, right? Like those only applies to authentication webhooks, right? That are configured via the CLI and have access to file-based stuff.
I think that applies to the general admission webhook.
Where would I configure a file in the admission webhook? David, you're on the call. Help.
It's okay. So are we talking about the client side or the webhook server side?
Oh, like right here, right? Like there is no way in this thing right here today to say there's a cube config, right? Like I'm making sure.
Oh yeah. So if you scroll down a little bit more, so that's the existing way to specify the kube config. So in the admission configuration, so this is a file. This is a file itself, and then it refers to another kube config file. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I forgot. So do we let you reference a? What is it?
So this is yeah, we let you, like, so API servers can refer to this file by the admission, by the auth.
Oh, okay, now I'm remembering. This is
Yeah.
like secondary config that's so separate. Why is this so awful? Okay, yeah, so I remember now. So you could configure it separately, and then when the webhooks were registered, they would use stuff that matched. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So certainly, I mean, to be fair, the proposal you have sounds way better than that. That's good. Yeah, I mean, if we're sort of happy with an approach that is sort of very kube centric and basically says, yeah, you get to use token request or have a lot of pain and suffering, it's fine.
Yeah, so in the future, if you want to expand it, we can use other authentication sources. This is Mike Denise's idea to have like a union type of configuration. So I borrowed the page from him. Yeah. Okay, so I will follow up with the more research on how we can use the extensions API service account to as like a client identity in the token request. Yeah.
Looks like we are out of time, so I will just roll the stuff that's left on the agenda to the next meeting. Jordan, did you have something to say, Kobe?
Nope. Just a reminder that code freeze is next week. So if you are targeting things for 121, they should be going in now-ish.
Awesome. All right. See y'all in 2 weeks. There's